What comes to mind when you think of Canada? A land of immigrants, freezing winters, or polite people. These are the promoted narratives you see all over the internet. And sure, the stats are impressive. 10 million square kilometers of land, 20% of the world's freshwater, and a seat at the G7 table. But Canada isn't just a country that happens to be big and wealthy. It was designed to be a high-functioning economic machine. While other nations were born out of revolutions or ancient dynasties, Canada was born as a corporation. The foundation of this nation wasn't a constitution, it was a trade monopoly. It was built upon the Hudson's Bay Company, founded in 1670 for the fur trade. In other words, at the very core of Canada, there was a balance sheet long before there was a democracy. It all started with a bizarre fashion trend in 17th century Europe, beaver hats. What the iPhone is today, the beaver hat was then, a status symbol, a mark of wealth, an absolute must-have. But there was a problem. European beavers were on the brink of extinction. So they set their sights across the ocean on those vast, uncharted lands. In 1670, King Charles II of England granted a monopoly to a group of merchants who founded the Hudson's Bay Company. The king handed this company the deed to Rupert's Land, a massive territory encompassing 40% of modern-day Canada. This meant a single company held a monopoly over nearly 3.9 million square kilometers, along with all its natural resources. At this time, Canada was not a state. It was the private property of a London-based joint stock corporation. And there was the indigenous population, completely unaware that their ancestral lands had been handed over to people they had never met. The company had its own currency and its own private army. Their flag bore the motto, pro pelcutum, meaning an eye for an eye, a skin for a skin. This was the slogan Canada was built upon. People didn't come here to establish a free homeland or bring democracy. They came to satisfy Europe's luxury consumption and to pad the company's balance sheet. When the Canadian Confederation was formed in 1867, the new state had to buy this land back from the company for £300,000. Canada, as a state, began its life by taking over its territory from a corporation. The land was secured, but there was a new business plan needed to monetize this vast void. The Canadian government launched one of the largest infrastructure projects in history, the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR. But this wasn't just a transport project. It was the new face of the monopolist mindset inherited from the Hudson's Bay Company. To build this railway, the state gave the company $25 million in cash and 25 million acres of the most fertile land for free. Think about that. The state was gifting the most valuable parts of the country to a private corporation in exchange for a road. Here is the catch. A railway without cargo is just an expensive pile of steel. To make those trains profitable, the company needed a commodity to move, and they found it: wheat. But you couldn't just wait for people to show up and start farming. So the railway company and the government became the world's biggest marketing agency. A massive campaign was launched in Europe, promising free land. Millions of immigrants were shipped to Canada. They thought they were coming for freedom, but in reality they were the fuel for this machine. By the early 1900s, Canada had become a branch plant economy. As it pulled away from Britain, it opened its doors to the industrial hunger of its southern neighbor, the USA. Instead of becoming an independent manufacturing power, it accepted being the backyard where American giants built factories and extracted resources cheaply. Canada entered the 20th century not as a sovereign nation-state, but as a massive operational center managing resources and labor for global capital. As the world rebuilt after World War II, Canada's economic identity shifted once more. It was no longer just about wheat. The game was now about what lay beneath the soil. On February 13, 1947, oil struck at Leduc number 1 in Alberta. This discovery sat Canada at the high-stakes table of global energy. Canada was no longer just a farm, it was one of the world's largest energy depots. Again, this wealth came with a strategy. Instead of creating its own global brands, Canada opened its doors even wider to the U.S. With the 1965 Auto Pact, Ontario became the production hub for American car giants like Ford, GM, and Chrysler. The logic was rational. America brings the tech and capital. Canada provides cheap energy, raw materials, and labor. The massive revenues from oil, gas, and minerals financed the social state we know today. Universal health care and education were built on top of extracted commodities. But this made Canada's economy a hostage to global commodity prices. By the 1980s, Canada was a resource giant. But as manufacturing began shifting to Asia, this country needed a new financial model. What would replace the factories? The answer led to the financialization process that created today's housing and banking deadlock. From the 90s onwards, as the industrial margins dropped, Canada found a new profit center: debt and real estate. Canada stopped trying to dominate the world with technology or cars. Instead, it used its image as a safe haven to funnel global capital into its housing market. Today, nearly 10% of Canada's GDP comes directly from the real estate sector. When combined with construction, the backbone of the country is no longer production, it is concrete. The Canadian banking system, the Big Five, is the modern version of the 1670 Hudson's Bay Company. These 5 giant banks, protected by the state and closed to foreign competition, have driven household debt to historic levels. Canada now has one of the highest household debt-to-income ratios in the G7. Canada's economy no longer grows by selling products to the world. It grows by indebting its own citizens at home. Housing is no longer a place to live. It is a financial asset. Supported by low interest rates and record-high immigration targets, this model has pushed housing prices far beyond the reach of local wages. The labor imported 100 years ago for the railways is now being imported to keep this real estate bubble from bursting, providing the new tenants and taxpayers needed to keep the gears turning. There is a paradox here. If the economy is so dependent on concrete, why is there a housing crisis in Canada? The answer is simple: because the system produces houses as financial instruments, not as homes. Just like the fur trade, it wasn't about everyone wearing a hat, it was about the value of those furs on the exchange. Today, housing supply is dictated by the appetite of investment funds and speculators. Supply is kept intentionally below demand to ensure that prices, and the collateral held by banks, never drop. In this system, scarcity is a management tool. The lack of competition in Canada is not an accident. It is a continuation of the privileged corporation model in the country's DNA. Today, you buy your food from Loblaws, use a phone from Rogers, and pay your debt to RBC. A handful of giant families and corporations control every capillary of the economy. Just as the Hudson's Bay Company set the price of fur 350 years ago, these modern giants dictate your cost of living today. The Lydians invented money for control. The Hudson's Bay Company built a country by controlling the land. Today, Canada may look like a modern democracy, but at its heart, it is still the same old balance sheet being managed. The citizens are no longer trappers chasing beavers. They are modern-day tenants signing 30-year debt contracts. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more. It's the best way to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.